Okay, let's really dive into something fascinating today. For generations, the idea of growing up had a pretty clear, predictable script, right?
Yeah, definitely. You graduated, maybe went to college, found a job, moved out.
Right. Got married, maybe started a family, often all by a certain age. It was like a well-trodden road,
Yeah.
a widely accepted blueprint for adulthood.
Exactly. But if you look around today at, well, young adults, it's increasingly clear that many are following a completely different map.
Totally. Those traditional milestones seem to be happening later, or sometimes maybe not at all.
Uh-huh.
So the big question we're asking in this deep dive is this profound shift primarily a matter of personal choice, like a conscious decision by young people to forge a different path?
Or are there much larger systemic forces at play? Things happening in the world that are fundamentally reshaping this transition.
That's the core question, choice or circumstance.
And what's truly illuminating here is how the very concept of adulthood itself is undergoing this profound evolution. We're going to embark on an in-depth exploration of what researchers are now frequently calling emerging adulthood.
Emerging adulthood, okay.
Yeah, it's seen as a distinct, often complex, and increasingly prolonged stage that fundamentally challenges our long-held definitions of what it truly means to grow up, to be an adult.
So our mission today is to really distill the most vital nuggets of knowledge, the surprising insights from, well, a stack of incredible sources you've shared with us.
Exactly. We'll be drawing extensively from emerging adulthood as a critical stage in the life course from the NCBI. That's a really foundational piece.
Okay.
Then we'll turn to shifting life milestones across ages, a matter of preference or circumstance. That's from the Stanford Center on Longevity. Really gets at that choice versus circumstance question.
Right.
And we'll consider some truly compelling and, let's be honest, sometimes controversial perspectives from Why Young Refused to Grow Up, Adulting to Late Adulthood by Sam Vaknin.
Okay, so different viewpoints there.
Definitely. And finally, we'll gain a fascinating kind of real-time glimpse into online social support from Social Media Reveals Challenges and Stress During Post-College Life Transitions by Kustu Saha, looking at places like Reddit.
Wow, okay, that's a great mix of sources. So the ultimate goal is to help you, our listeners, understand precisely what is unfolding in this critical life stage.
And perhaps most importantly, why these shifts matter so deeply, to all of us and to the fabric of society itself.
So this isn't just a casual observation about young people taking a bit longer to settle down or like a pop culture caricature of a Peter Pan generation.
No, not at all.
Researchers are actually defining this as a whole new developmental stage. What exactly do they mean by emerging adulthood, and how is it different from just, a longer adolescence?
That's a crucial distinction, yeah. And the research helps us make it. This period typically spanning from about 17 or 18 years of age right through to the mid to late 20s.
Okay, quite a long span.
It is. And it's characterized as a prolonged and increasingly complicated journey from childhood dependency to adult independence.
More complicated than before, you think?
Definitely seems that way. And it's vital to understand it's not simply a longer adolescence. It's seen as a distinct phase with its own unique challenges, its own opportunities, and developmental tasks. The NCBI source really highlights this distinction clearly.
So a distinct phase.
Right. Now, it's fair to say not all developmental scientists might agree it's a brand new stage in the same way we think of infancy or adolescence.
Okay. Some debate there.
A bit. But there is an overwhelming consensus that powerful social and economic forces have definitely prolonged the entry into adulthood far beyond what we traditionally consider the end of the adolescent years.
So the path isn't as clear-cut.
Exactly. The path from youth to full independence is no longer a straight highway. It's become a winding, often circuitous route.
That makes a lot of sense. A distinct phase, not just an extended adolescence. Historically, were these transitions always so fluid and open to individual choice? Or is this fluidity itself like a relatively new thing?
That's a great question. If we look back through history, Sam Vaknin offers a compelling observation. He argues that throughout most of human history, transitions from one life stage to another were far more rigid.
Rigid how?
Often predetermined by societal roles, family expectations, community needs, and largely irreversible. Think about, say, an agrarian society. Your role was often set by your birth, your gender, the needs of your family, farm, or community.
Right, not much wiggle room.
Very little. You transition from child to adult by taking on specific, often physically demanding responsibilities like working the land, maybe getting married early, raising a family, and there was very little room for individual choice, in adopting or reversing these roles.
Once you were in, you were in.
Pretty much. Once you were married or working the family trade or a parent, that was generally it. But today, the very idea of adult roles and chores is becoming what Vaknin calls choice-dependent.
Choice-dependent, meaning?
Meaning we can opt into them, or perhaps more commonly now decide to put them off, delay them, maybe even reverse them, at least for a time, like moving back home after college.
That level of individual agency in defining one's adult path is quite unprecedented, isn't it?
Absolutely. Historically speaking, it's a major shift.
So what are these big societal forces that have converged to create this new, more fluid and prolonged stage that we're seeing today? What's driving this profound shift?
The NCBI source points to several key drivers that have really emerged from our post-industrial society, creating this complex new landscape.
Okay, like what?
Firstly, there's been a significant surge in individualism, self-realization, and personal expression. This trend really took root from the mid to late 20th century onwards.
The focus shifted inward.
You could say that. People became far more focused on individual journeys, identity formation, exploring who they are before settling into traditional roles. Sociologists like Jeffrey Arnett highlighted this back in the late 90s. The emphasis shifted from just fulfilling communal roles to achieving personal fulfillment.
Makes sense. What else?
Secondly, there's been a dramatic increase in the requirement for post-high school education.
College degrees becoming almost mandatory for good jobs.
Exactly. As our economy transformed from an industrial model built on manufacturing and physical labor to an information and knowledge-based economy, a college degree, or at least some form of specialized training, became almost a prerequisite for many desirable jobs.
Right.
As Jeremy Rifkin discussed back in 2011, this societal demand for higher skills means young people are spending many more years in educational institutions, naturally pushing back the age at which they enter the full-time workforce.
So education itself extends this phase.
It does. And finally, you have the powerful and often, frankly, overwhelming combined impact of several economic factors.
Okay, the money stuff.
Yeah. Stagnant wages for low-skilled workers, making it incredibly difficult to live independently, especially in expensive areas. A persistent lack of meaningful work opportunities, specifically for youth, leading to periods of unemployment or underemployment right after graduation.
The job market hurdle.
Definitely. And then the ever-increasing costs of education itself, tuition fees, student loans, and simply the cost of living independently. Rent, utilities, food. It all adds up.
It really does.
Imagine facing escalating tuition fees, soaring rents, and an uncertain job market immediately after graduation. All of these factors together make the pathway to full financial and residential independence much more prolonged and incredibly complex.
It's truly a perfect storm, isn't it?
Yeah.
Social changes, educational changes, economic pressures.
Exactly, a perfect storm of social and economic pressures that have fundamentally reshaped the transition to adulthood.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. It's not just about these big societal and economic shifts, but also about biology, right? The human brain is still very much in development during these emerging adult years.
Yes, absolutely.
How does that biological reality interact with these new social structures?
That's an absolutely critical piece of the puzzle, and it raises a really important question. How are young people supposed to navigate this less structured, more complex world when their own internal guidance system is still, well, under construction?
Right.
The human brain, particularly its higher-level capacities like executive functioning, and that encompasses crucial abilities like impulse control, long-term planning, risk assessment, complex decision-making.
All the stuff you need to be an adult.
Pretty much. That part of the brain continues to mature and develop until around age 25.
25, that's quite late.
It is later than many people realize. So it means emerging adults are asked to navigate incredibly complex decisions, career paths, financial planning, relationship choices within a less structured societal environment, all while their neurological foundation for these very skills is still actively maturing. The NCBI source, drawing on seminal research by people like Speer and Dahl, and even Vaknin mentions this, reiterates this point. It's almost like they're being asked to fly a complex aircraft.
But the controls aren't fully installed yet.
Exactly. Or they're still learning how to use them optimally.
Yeah.
It adds another layer of challenge to this whole period.
That's a powerful and slightly daunting image, building the plane while flying it, indeed. So they're gaining more agency, more freedom, more individual choice in their daily lives. But simultaneously losing the traditional safety nets they once had, all while their brains are still figuring things out. That truly sounds like a profound paradox.
It absolutely is. And that's
Yeah.
really the core challenge of emerging adulthood. On one hand, individuals gain significantly increased agency and choice. They get to decide what to study, where to live, who to be with, what their values are. It's a period of immense self-discovery and potential.
Which sounds great in theory.
It does. But simultaneously, they experience a significant loss of the traditional built-in supports and structures that were previously offered by their families, by schools, and by established child and family-oriented health and social services.
Like the clear schedules of school, the automatic social network.
Exactly. The supervision, the financial safety net of maybe living at home or having parents cover more costs. As those structures recede, it forces emerging adults to rely far more heavily on their own internal resources and coping mechanisms.
Wow.
As the NCBI source emphasizes, this dynamic creates a unique developmental crucible. They have more freedom, but less scaffolding.
So this intricate interplay of increased agency, decreased structure, and a still developing brain must naturally lead to incredibly varied experiences for young people, right?
Absolutely.
It seems logical that not everyone is going to navigate this period successfully or arrive at the same destination.
Precisely. These complex interactions between the individual and their context, what researchers call person-context coactions, lead to multiple, often divergent pathways through emerging adulthood. You'll see a wide spectrum of outcomes.
So some manage okay, others really struggle.
Definitely. Those fortunate enough to have sufficient economic, adult, and personal supports may be parents who can help with college costs, offer consistent guidance, or provide a stable home base for a bit longer.
Right. The safety net is still there, just different.
Exactly. They're far more likely to make positive choices and embark on a favorable trajectory. They have a stronger foundation to navigate the challenges.
And the flip side.
Conversely, those lacking these critical resources, perhaps from families with limited financial means, or those with fewer mentors, or those with pre-existing physical, mental health, or intellectual disabilities, they may struggle significantly during this less structured period.
It magnifies existing disadvantages.
It really can. They often experience negative trajectories in crucial areas like education, vocational achievement, stable relationships, and overall health status. This entire period, from roughly 18 to 28, is dynamic and often volatile, affecting individuals on deeply personal, social, emotional, and even neuroanatomical levels.
Neuroanatomical. So it impacts brain development too.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
The NCBI source truly underscores how vulnerable some emerging adults are in this increasingly complex and less structured landscape, highlighting that the challenges are not evenly distributed.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. We often hear in popular culture about young adults as the Peter Pan generation or boomerang kids, choosing to delay marriage or home ownership. It's often framed as a lifestyle choice, right? A preference for prolonged youth.
Yeah, that narrative is definitely out there.
But is that what the actual data shows? Are these delays genuinely a matter of personal preference, or is circumstance playing a much larger role?
That's a really critical distinction, and it's precisely what the Stanford Center on Longevity study set out to understand. Their research, explicitly titled Shifting Life Milestones Across Ages, a Matter of Preference or Circumstance, provides robust empirical data on this very question.
Okay, so they tackled it head on.
They did. And it reveals a striking, almost jarring disconnect between what young people want to achieve and what they actually experience. It directly challenges that popular narrative of pure choice.
And how did they go about researching this? What was their methodology? Did they just ask people?
It was more rigorous than that. The Stanford study, conducted in 2017, used the RAND American Life Panel.
Okay, what's that?
It's a nationally representative, probability-based panel of Americans aged 18 and over, so it ensures a broad and accurate representation of the U.S. population. Their final sample included a substantial 1,716 respondents.
That's a good number.
Yeah. They then divided these respondents into 6 distinct age groups, ranging from 25-34 years old all the way up to 75-plus long.
Covering a wide generational span.
Exactly. And the core aims were twofold. First, to examine variations across these age groups in the ideal age at which people wanted to reach certain major life milestones.
What they hoped for.
Right. And second, to assess the extent to which people's actual timing of these milestones aligned with their stated ideals.
So hope versus reality.
Pretty much. They focused on 5 universally recognized milestones: starting a full-time job, starting to save for retirement, getting married, buying a home, and starting a family.
the classic markers.
The classic markers. It was a comprehensive and insightful look at how the timeline of the American dream, so to speak, has or hasn't shifted in people's minds and lives.
So what did this comprehensive study reveal about those ideal timelines across different generations? Did the younger generations express a desire to delay these things, maybe preferring more freedom or something?
Well, this is where it gets fascinating, perhaps counterintuitive, based on those popular narratives. The ideal timing for experiencing major life events, things like starting a full-time job, getting married, buying a home, starting a family, has remained remarkably constant across generations.
Really? Constant?
Remarkably so. In other words, people in their 20s and 30s today want to achieve these milestones at very similar ages to their counterparts, who are now in their 60s and 70s.
Wow. So the goalposts haven't moved in their minds.
Exactly. The traditional vision of the American dream timeline hasn't really shifted in people's aspirations. The desire for these conventional markers of adulthood is still very strong, regardless of generation.
That's genuinely surprising. So the desire for these traditional markers is still strong, even if the popular perception is that young people are actively rejecting them. Was there any milestone where the ideal did shift significantly?
Yes, there was one notable exception: retirement savings.
Ah, okay. How so?
Younger generations ideally want to start saving for retirement earlier than older generations did, and remarkably, 43% of them are actually succeeding in doing so.
43%. That's pretty high.
It is. It's a higher percentage than any older age group in the study. The Stanford researchers suggest this particular shift might be due to changes in institutional policies related to retirement savings.
Like 401ks being more common or automatic enrollment.
Exactly. Things that make it easier or more encouraged for younger workers to begin saving sooner through employer-sponsored plans.
Makes sense. What about starting a job?
For starting a full-time job, there was also much less variation across generations in actual achievement. The vast majority, upwards of 70%, were working full-time by age 22.
So getting that first job seems mostly on track.
Largely, yes. It seems early career entry is happening. But it's those other milestones, marriage, family, home ownership, that are facing considerable headwinds.
Okay, so the ideals are remarkably stable across generations, except for retirement savings. But what about the reality of when people actually achieve these other key milestones? Is that where we see the big generational divide emerge?
Absolutely. This is where the profound shift truly becomes crystal clear. While there weren't significant age group differences in when people ideally wanted to reach these milestones,
Right.
there were pronounced and significant age differences in what people actually experienced.
Okay, here comes.
The study found that the oldest generation in their sample, those 65 years and older, had the highest percentage of individuals who actually met their ideal age for getting married, buying a home, and starting a family.
They lived the dream they envisioned.
Largely, yes. Their reality mostly matched their ideals for those milestones. But here's the crucial and, frankly, sobering part.
Uh-oh.
For every subsequent younger age group, there was a distinct linear decline in the percentage of people meeting their ideal for those three key milestones: marriage, homeownership, and starting a family.
Linear decline. So each generation is doing worse than the last on meeting their own goals.
In terms of timing, yes. That's what the data suggests. It's not a subtle shift. It suggests that younger groups are increasingly less likely to experience these foundational milestones at the age they want, or indeed perhaps not at all.
Wow. The gap between aspiration and reality is widening with each successive generation.
Precisely.
A linear decline across generations. That really paints a clear and concerning picture. Where was this discrepancy between ideal and reality most pronounced? Was one milestone hit harder than others?
Overwhelmingly, yes. The most significant and striking gap was in homeownership.
I had a feeling you might say that.
The rates of homeownership were so low among 25 to 34-year-olds in the study that the researchers couldn't even calculate a median actual age for this group.
They couldn't even calculate it. Why not?
Because too few of them had actually bought a home yet. The number was statistically too small to find a reliable midpoint.
That's staggering. For many in that group, it's not just delayed, it's essentially off the charts, an unquantifiable aspiration.
Exactly. Rather than a delayed reality, it seemed almost like a different reality altogether. And even among the next group up, the 35 to 54-year-olds, there was a huge 7-year gap between when they wanted to buy a home and when they actually managed to do so.
7 year.
Compare that to those 65 and older for them. the gap was only 1 to 2 years.
That's a massive shift. Homeownership has historically been such a core part of the American dream and a primary way to build wealth.
Absolutely. So the difficulty in achieving it is profoundly reshaping the economic landscape and the sense of possibility for younger generations.
And what are the broader implications of this growing chasm between what people want and what they can actually achieve? For individuals, for society?
Well, the Stanford study importantly found that greater discrepancies between what people want and what they actually do reliably predict poorer health and overall well-being.
Poorer health. How so?
It seems the constant stress and disappointment take a toll. It's not just about personal frustration or feeling like you're falling behind your peers or expectations. These unmet aspirations have real, measurable impacts on people's lives mentally and physically.
So it connects to mental health trends?
The study suggests it might. The increasing rates of failing to reach these major life milestones within the time frame we set for ourselves and that our society has historically expected may offer a significant explanation for why we are seeing a troubling rise in deaths of despair alongside growing rates of depression and anxiety in society today.
Wow. That's a heavy connection.
It is. When aspirations are consistently thwarted by circumstance, it takes a severe toll on mental and emotional health. So one of the study's powerful concluding thoughts is that maybe reducing that discrepancy.
How? By helping people achieve the goals.
Maybe. Or perhaps by adjusting our societal expectations of what constitutes a successful adult life. That shift could be a critical step in significantly offsetting these growing mental health crises we are witnessing.
Rethinking the dream itself. Okay, so it's abundantly clear that these delays aren't just about personal choice. There are significant, often overwhelming external factors at play, particularly economic ones.
Definitely.
What are the big economic and societal forces pushing these milestones later, creating this growing gap between aspiration and reality?
This raises an important question that both the NCBI and Sam Vaknin sources grapple with. Economic realities, particularly the skyrocketing cost of living, have become a monumental, often insurmountable barrier for many young people.
Yeah, you hear about that constantly.
Vaknin, in particular, paints a stark picture. He argues that the prices of housing and rentals have literally exploded. He goes so far as to assert that for many young people, homeownership has become an utterly impossible pipe dream.
An impossible pipe dream. Strong words.
They are, and he emphasizes a critical point, directly challenging common societal criticisms. He says millennials and Gen Z cannot buy homes because they are simply too expensive, not, as some might suggest, because they are inherently profligate or wasteful with their money.
So it's a structural barrier, not just bad spending habits.
That's his argument. It's a systemic issue, not merely a personal failing.
That's a very stark assessment. And what does Vaknin claim is the consequence of this widespread realization that owning property is often an insurmountable goal? How does that affect behavior?
Well, this is where Vaknin gets quite controversial. Due to this deep-seated understanding that owning property is largely unattainable, he argues that young people redirect their disposable income towards what he terms frivolities.
Frivolities, like what? Avocado toast?
He cites examples like purchasing an abundance of devices, excessive drinking, immersive gaming, and frequent individual travel, rather than saving for a down payment or investing in a traditional future.
Okay, so spending on experiences or immediate gratification instead of long-term assets they feel they can't reach anyway.
That's the idea. He frames this behavior as a collective giving up on life, effectively resigning themselves to lifelong dependence on their parents or on the state, and adopting what he provocatively calls a parasitic mindset.
Wow, parasitic mindset is incredibly harsh. Does he offer any justification?
He does suggest, almost paradoxically, that this mindset, while seemingly negative, is in some ways justified by reality, given the economic barriers they face. It's a very critical perspective.
Definitely controversial. And what about attitudes towards work itself? Is there a similar shift in how young people view traditional employment?
Vaknin makes another highly controversial claim regarding work. He asserts that a significant portion, somewhere between 25% and 40% of young adults worldwide, are not only unemployed, but are also actively not looking for a job.
Not even looking why?
He suggests they regard traditional, stable employment as something dirty, a sentiment he provocatively compares to the European aristocracy of the 17th century, who disdained manual labor.
Okay, that comparison seems like a stretch. But he's suggesting a widespread aversion to conventional work.
That's the implication he draws, yes. Among a substantial segment of this demographic, again, it's a very strong and debatable claim.
It is. Earlier, you mentioned money is seen as a new religion for them, according to Vaknin. Can you elaborate on that? How does that connect to these attitudes towards work and property?
Indeed. Vaknin claims there's an absolute obsession with money among the young, where it has become this central, almost singular value in their lives, supposedly trumping relationships and other traditional life aspirations.
So money above everything else.
That's his portrayal. The prevailing goal, he argues, is to get filthy rich now. With some studies, he references even showing an ideal of going on pension at an incredibly young age, like 35.
Pension at 35, that seems unrealistic for most.
Highly. He cites a Pew Research Center study finding that a lack of financial means and readiness is a key reason young adults delay adulthood, including marriage and leaving home. That part is well supported.
Right.
However, he then highlights a paradox. He claims that when asked how much money is enough, young adults often respond with unrealistic figures like billions, seeing anything less as a personal failure.
Billions. Seriously.
That's his claim. And he argues this mindset becomes, in his contentious view, an excellent excuse not to grow up. This creates a bizarre dynamic where immense, rapid wealth is desired, but the traditional, gradual hard work and consistent effort required to achieve it are often rejected.
So wanting the outcome without the process.
That's the controversial picture Vaknin paints, yes. A pursuit of extreme wealth combined with an aversion to traditional work.
It sounds like education, which traditionally served as a clear step into adulthood and economic independence, has ironically become a significant reason for many to delay it. How is this happening?
This is a profound and complex shift with major implications. While increased education is undeniably necessary for navigating our modern information-based economy and securing higher-paying jobs.
Which we already established.
Right. But Vaknin controversially asserts that it has also become a strategy, maybe even an alibi, for delaying adult responsibilities.
An alibi? How?
Young people are spending significantly more time in college or university, often graduating 2 to 3 years older than their counterparts in the 1970s and 1980s.
Okay.
This further education frequently involves pursuing multiple degrees, a bachelor's, followed by a master's, sometimes even a second master's or a PhD.
Which naturally extends the time before they're fully in the workforce.
Exactly. It inevitably extends the period of academic engagement and postpones entry into the full-time workforce and other adult roles.
And this extended education comes with a huge financial cost, right? Student debt is constantly in the news. It sounds like a major barrier.
Absolutely enormous. This prolonged time in education directly leads to accumulating huge student loans and debt. Vaknin points out that while the median student loan might be around $25,000,
Which is already a lot.
it is, but many young adults are holding staggering amounts, $100,000, $150,000, or even more in educational debt.
Wow. That's like a mortgage before you even think about a house.
Precisely. And this crushing financial burden is then consistently cited as the #1 reason young people give for delaying crucial life decisions and traditional milestones.
Like moving out, marriage, kids, buying a home.
All of it. The weight of student debt effectively stunts their ability to progress into what were once considered the standard markers of adulthood, forcing them to remain in a state of financial dependency or at least significant financial constraint for far longer.
So in Vaknin's controversial view, education isn't just a requirement. It's also at times a convenient excuse for not embracing adult responsibilities.
Precisely. That's his argument. For some, he claims, the pursuit of education has become a socially acceptable way to avoid the often mundane, difficult, and overwhelming responsibilities and chores of life that come with full independence.
How so? What's the excuse?
It provides a ready-made excuse like, I can't truly grow up right now because I have to pay back my massive student loans, or while I'm still studying, my mother and father should continue to support me financially. He suggests, in his most provocative assessment, that universities and colleges are effectively populated by young adults who are using the structure and demands of academia as a convenient means to avoid life and reality, thereby delaying the inevitable challenges, duties, and independence that traditionally define adulthood.
That's a very cynical take on higher education's role.
It is extremely cynical, and certainly not the experience of every student, but it's the perspective he puts forward forcefully.
Okay. Beyond these significant financial and educational shifts, the very nature of relationships and social interaction seems to be transforming for younger generations. What are we seeing there? How are young people connecting, or maybe not connecting?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, there's a strong argument, particularly coming from Vaknin again, that young people are increasingly prioritizing self-actualization, immediate gratification, having fun, entertainment.
The frivolities he mentioned earlier?
Perhaps. And he claims this significantly impacts their approach to relationships and social life. Many young people, he argues, place an overwhelming emphasis on these personal pursuits, leading to a more self-centered or inward-looking perspective.
How does that play out in practice?
From this viewpoint, societal expectations and traditional life milestones are often judged primarily by the question, what does it do for me?
Okay, so a very individualistic lens.
That's the claim. This self-focused lens extends to traditional milestones. Finishing school is desirable only if it would make me rich. Living at home indefinitely is pragmatic to avoid rent. Finding a life partner is perceived as risky or something that would hinder my career.
And parenthood.
Parenthood is often seen as something to defer much later in life, or, in his most provocative terms, just another toy to be acquired when convenient. He even controversially notes that when asked about intimacy, a sizable portion of young people cited the cost of buying drinks for my date as a barrier.
Seriously, cost of drinks is a barrier to intimacy.
That's what he claims, suggesting a prioritization of financial outlay over interpersonal connection, or perhaps just highlighting financial stress bleeding into all areas. It's a stark example he uses.
That's a pretty cynical view of young people's motivations. What does the available data suggest about actual relationship commitment and social engagement? Are we seeing a decline?
The data, according to Vaknin's interpretation, does indeed indicate significant delays in relationship commitment and a broader social aversion.
Delays like what?
He notes that the median age for men to enter a committed relationship was around 30 in 2018, and he says it has since risen to 32.5. For women, it's now around 30.
So people are pairing up later.
Significantly later than previous generations, yes. This suggests to him a clear trend towards an aversion to commitment, long-term relationships, and deep intimacy among those under 30.
And beyond romantic relationships, what about friendships or general social interaction?
He describes young adults as becoming highly individualistic, increasingly atomized, and even solipsistic, meaning entirely self-absorbed. He controversially claims they often refuse to engage in collaborative work with other people.
Refuse to work together? How?
He even cites examples, claiming millions under 25 resigned from jobs post-pandemic because they simply didn't want to meet colleagues in person again. It's a bold claim about workplace dynamics.
That is a bold claim, and intimacy in general.
He goes further, stating that people under 30 regard almost any human interaction, including sex, as unpleasant, uncomfortable, onerous, and best avoided, noting a stark collapse in the frequency of sex among people younger than 35.
A collapse in frequency? That sounds extreme.
It's strong language, yes. It paints a picture of a generation withdrawing into themselves, potentially creating a deep well of social isolation, and potentially contributing to some of the self-soothing behaviors he also mentions, like eating disorders or substance abuse, which the NCBI source also notes can increase during EA.
That sounds like an enormous amount of pressure and potential isolation. Are these broad social and developmental changes reflected in the overall mental health of young adults?
This raises an important question, and the answer, unfortunately, is a resounding yes. We are indeed witnessing a profoundly troubling and well-documented rise in mental health challenges, which is a significant and complicating factor in the experience of emerging adulthood.
What kind of rise are we talking about?
Vaknin highlights alarming rates of depression and anxiety, which he claims have gone up by a staggering 300% and 500% respectively among young people within just one decade.
300 and 500% within a decade.
That's his assertion. He projects this shift from what was a negligible minority to a very sizable one, soon, he claims, to become a majority. It's a dramatic claim, but the trend is undeniable.
What do more clinical sources say?
The NCDI source provides a more clinical perspective, reporting that a significant 13.7% of young adults experience serious mental illness.
Serious mental illness like
Debilitating conditions such as major depressive disorders, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. These statistics underscore a widespread crisis in mental well-being for this generation, regardless of the exact percentage increase.
Those numbers are truly staggering and deeply concerning. What are the contributing factors that researchers point to for this sharp decline in mental well-being among young adults? It can't just be one thing.
No, it's definitely not just one thing. The NCBI source points to a complex web of contributing factors. The onset of neuropsychological pathology during emerging adulthood is often linked to predisposing factors.
Like what kind of factors?
Things like challenging family adversities, social disadvantage, parental divorce, dysfunctional parenting styles, and even negative peer group choices during formative adolescent years.
So stuff from earlier in life carrying over.
Absolutely. And the expanded independence and increased self-reliance that define emerging adulthood while offering freedom can be particularly difficult for youth who come into this stage with pre-existing emotional or social challenges, or maybe who have experienced poor attachment in early life.
The lack of structure is harder for them.
It can be. Furthermore, the very decrease in traditional institutional and family supports that characterizes emerging adulthood can be profoundly destabilizing for some. This loss of a consistent safety net often leads to increased emotional and interpersonal difficulties.
And biology plays a role too.
Yes. Adding another layer of complexity. Factors like ongoing brain immaturity, which we discussed, chronic stress from navigating all these pressures, or adverse childhood events can significantly increase the likelihood of academic failure, engagement in risky behaviors like substance misuse.
Which creates a vicious cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of these, in turn, further interfere with optimal development during this critical period. It's a confluence of biological, social, and psychological vulnerabilities.
And is the timing of the onset of these mental health challenges significant? Does it matter when they begin?
Critically important, absolutely. Research consistently shows that 75% of all lifetime cases of mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders actually begin by age 24.
3/4 by age 24. So right in the middle of emerging adulthood.
Precisely. What's even more alarming is that an earlier onset, say in adolescence, is associated with a much higher risk of more severe, recurrent, and often more difficult to treat forms of these disorders later on.
Why is that?
These early onset cases are frequently linked to increased severity and complexity of underlying family and biological risk factors, as noted in the NCBI source, citing influential research by Kessler and Moffitt and Caspi.
So it's not like these issues appear out of nowhere.
Not usually. For a significant number of young people, these profound mental health struggles don't just appear suddenly in adulthood. They often begin just as they are entering or actively navigating the already complex and challenging period of emerging adulthood, making their journey to independence inherently much more arduous.
And for some, like those with chronic health conditions or disabilities, these already monumental challenges during emerging adulthood must be amplified, right? Adding another profound layer of difficulty.
Precisely. That's a crucial point. The deep dive into the NCBI source highlights how chronic diseases add yet another significant layer of complexity to emerging adulthood. They directly impact the pathway through this stage and the ability to achieve those key life milestones we discussed earlier.
How so? Can you give an example?
The source uses chronic kidney disease, or CKD, as a powerful and illustrative example to demonstrate this compounding burden.
Okay, how does CKD specifically impact emerging adults? What does it reveal about the broader challenges?
Well, CKD is a serious condition. It's characterized by progressive kidney damage, significant cardiovascular morbidity, that means heart-related complications, potentially growth failure, neurocognitive impairment affecting thinking and learning, and a profoundly impaired quality of life.
That sounds incredibly difficult to manage at any age, let alone during this transition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And while the 10-year survival rate for adolescent onset end-stage kidney disease, or ESKD, is relatively high at 80–85%,
Which sounds okay.
it still represents a staggering 30-fold increase in mortality compared to the general U.S. adolescent population. So while many survive, their lives are often fundamentally altered and shortened.
And how does it affect those milestones?
Critically, emerging adults with CKD achieve typical adult milestones like gaining stable employment or entering into marriage far less frequently than their healthy peers. The constant demands of the illness get in the way.
That makes sense.
The NCBI source also notes that, tragically, African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately affected by CKD, adding a layer of systemic inequity to these health burdens. This specific example vividly illustrates how a chronic condition can derail the already challenging trajectory of emerging adulthood.
So individuals are forced to navigate health crises on top of all the normal developmental ones.
Exactly. It's a compounding burden.
So it's not just CKD, but broadly, any chronic condition or disability would likely add similar, perhaps unique burdens during emerging adulthood.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The NCBI source reiterates that youth and young adults living with any chronic disease or disability face substantial additional challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
The relentless demands of disease management, the unpredictability of complications, the need for frequent medical appointments, which disrupts education or work, and often significant limitations in educational, vocational, and even social opportunities.
It impacts every area of life.
Pretty much. All of these factors interact within the multiple domains of growth and development that define emerging adulthood, making their pathway through this stage inherently more difficult and complex. It's a compounding effect, where existing vulnerabilities are exacerbated by the challenges of this life stage.
And what does that mean for the kind of support these emerging adults need? Is the traditional support system sufficient, or do they require something different?
It means that these emerging adults, especially those living with chronic conditions or disabilities, require more substantial, highly individualized, and expertly tailored support to maximize their potential development during emerging adulthood.
Tailored support, meaning?
The traditional, often siloed support system, school counseling, maybe the separate medical care, are simply not enough. Service providers, for example, must recognize their specific cognitive maturation levels, their unique health needs, and adapt interventions accordingly.
So a one-size-fits-all approach definitely doesn't work.
Not at all. Their unique circumstances demand specialized, integrated care and a deep understanding to help them achieve positive life trajectories and navigate obstacles that their healthy peers just don't face. This highlights a crucial need for society to adapt its support structures.
Given all these immense pressures, from overwhelming financial burdens to mental health struggles to the complexities of managing chronic conditions, where are young adults turning for advice, information, and emotional support?
That's a great question.
Our sources looked at social media for some fascinating answers, offering a unique window into their struggles and coping mechanisms.
Yeah, what's truly fascinating here is how online communities, specifically platforms like Reddit, seem to be stepping in to fill critical gaps left by traditional institutional support systems, which often kind of vanish after college graduation.
Right, university support services end.
Exactly. The Kustuv Saha study, Social Media Reveals Challenges and Stress During Post-College Life Transitions, offers this unique, almost raw, unfiltered view into the experiences and challenges of the post-college transition.
And that transition period is key within emerging adulthood.
Absolutely. It's a critical subphase, often characterized by immense upheaval and uncertainty. The study reveals, in real time, how individuals are navigating this very stressful and often isolating time, turning to peers online for guidance.
So why is the immediate post-college transition considered such a critical and often stressful period? It's often painted as a time of celebration, freedom.
And it is a celebration, for sure. Graduation is a huge achievement. But the Saha study explains that it's simultaneously an incredibly stressful period for many young people.
Why stressful?
Well, individuals are not just finishing coursework. They are often simultaneously trying to secure postgraduate plans, finding that first full-time job, applying to grad school, figuring out internships.
A lot of uncertainty there.
Huge uncertainty. On top of that, they're frequently moving to entirely new cities, new living situations, and often leaving behind established social networks from their university years.
Right, losing that built-in community.
Exactly. It's a significant, multifaceted life transition that profoundly alters individuals' sense of being, their daily roles, their responsibilities, their physical surroundings. Imagine leaving the relatively structured, supportive environment of a university and suddenly facing a new city, a new job search, maybe significant debt, and the challenge of building an entirely new social circle from scratch. It's a recipe for significant stress and uncertainty.
And this is where social media comes in. How exactly does it play a role in providing support during such a turbulent time, especially when those traditional supports might be fading?
Exactly. Individuals are increasingly using social media platforms, like Reddit, to discuss their challenges, share information, seek advice, and find vital support. It seems they perceive a vacuum in traditional institutional support systems that often don't extend beyond the university campus.
And platforms like Reddit offer something different.
Yeah, the study notes that platforms like Reddit, with their anonymity-specific topic-focused communities, allow for open and candid expression of emotion and stress that might be harder elsewhere.
Less judgment, maybe.
Potentially. And crucially, they overcome some of the traditional barriers to studying this specific cohort, offering researchers like Saha an unprecedented real-time look into their struggles, anxieties, and coping strategies. It's like a powerful digital lifeline for many.
So the SAS study leveraged hundreds of thousands of Reddit posts. That's a lot of data. What specific anxieties and pressing issues were these emerging adults posting about online? What were the top concerns?
The research team used advanced techniques, natural language processing, machine learning, to sift through this enormous volume of data, identifying recurring themes and concerns. It really paints a detailed, immediate picture of the most pressing issues.
What kind of techniques?
They analyzed about 299,000 Reddit posts from 10 relevant subreddits between 2008 and 2020. They used methods like latent dirichlet allocation, or LDA, to automatically extract discussion topics, and then binary transfer learning to identify expressions of stress. They achieved a remarkably high accuracy, an F1 score of 0.94 in classifying stress.
Okay, so pretty sophisticated analysis. Diving into the actual findings, what were the predominant anxieties and challenges that emerged from these online discussions?
Several critical and recurring areas stood out. First, unsurprisingly perhaps, were frequent and urgent requests for informational advice regarding employment and career considerations.
Job hunting stress.
Big time. Posts included anxious questions about interviewing strategies, navigating recruitment processes, how to break into private industry versus academia, understanding job evaluations, finding a fulfilling career path, all that stuff.
Any examples stick out?
One poignant post captured a common sentiment. My academic career has been ideal. I cannot seem to land a job. It really highlights that disconnect between academic success and actually getting hired.
Yeah, that's tough. What else?
Second, post-undergraduate education was a major theme. Lots of support seeking for graduate school admissions, how to find good research advisors, getting recommendations, navigating funding options, evaluating different programs.
The whole grad school application nightmare.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The emotional journey was palpable too. One student shared their excitement after getting an acceptance following total rejection last cycle. You could feel the relief.
And what about the practicalities of setting up an independent life? Like where to live, how to manage money? I imagine those would be immediate concerns.
Absolutely. Those were paramount. Emerging adults frequently sought advice on locations and living situations.
Like, should I move to Austin or Seattle?
Exactly. Practical questions about which cities to move to, what kind of living arrangements were feasible, how to evaluate different locations based on desirability, safety, and crucially, cost. You saw posts mentioning specific, often expensive places like California and New York frequently.
And the money worries, specifically.
Oh, yeah. Financial pressures emerged as immediate and pressing concerns. These included the spiraling cost of school itself, the burden of student loans and other debt, the high cost of living expenses, and the daunting task of effective budgeting.
That constant financial anxiety.
Definitely. A compelling example from the data articulated this dilemma perfectly. I'm not interested in having a career if I don't pursue this MSW Master of Social Work, but the smart thing to do seems to be not to go into so much debt. It highlights the painful trade-offs many are forced to consider.
Pursue your passion or avoid crushing debt. Wow. Beyond these practical and financial anxieties, were there also significant posts about social life and, critically, mental health?
Yes, profoundly so. Social and relationship challenges were a prominent and often heartbreaking category.
Like what?
Discussions revolved around deep-seated issues of loneliness, the difficulty of making new friends in new cities after college, navigating complex romantic relationships. A common frustration echoed in many posts was how, after university, it will get harder to meet and talk to new people. There's a perceived loss of those built-in social structures.
That transition can be really isolating.
We really can. And perhaps most significantly, health and mental well-being were major topics of discussion, reflecting the broader trends we've already discussed.
So people were openly talking about anxiety, depression.
Very openly. There were candid discussions around mental health issues like anxiety and depression, burnout, as well as physical health concerns. One particularly poignant example was a student openly sharing their struggle with being on SSRIs for depression and anxiety, experiencing fatigue, crying before work shifts, and actively trying to prioritize their mental health amidst overwhelming academic and career pressures.
It truly sounds like these online communities are serving as an indispensable lifeline for many young people navigating this tumultuous period.
They absolutely are. The study powerfully highlights how these online communities serve as a vital source of peer support. They offer a safe space for candid self-disclosures that might be difficult to share with family or traditional support networks.
Finding people who get it.
Exactly. This open sharing helps individuals develop coping strategies, find solidarity, and assists with psychological adjustment to their new realities. Crucially, it enables them to connect with others who share strikingly similar experiences and anxieties without relying on geographic proximity, which is often lost after college as friends disperse.
That makes sense.
Users consistently expressed immense appreciation for the help they received from others with whom they shared a profound sense of belonging and understanding within these online niches.
That's an incredible amount of stress and uncertainty for young adults to navigate. Are these stresses constant throughout the year, or do they fluctuate with predictable patterns?
What's truly fascinating here, and a testament to the power of analyzing this kind of big data, is the clear temporal pattern of stress within these online communities.
A pattern, like it gets worse at certain times.
Yes, the Saha study found that the normalized volume of high-stress posts significantly increased over time, from 2011 to 2020, indicating a growing overall burden, which is concerning in itself.
Okay, a general upward trend.
But beyond that upward trend, there are also remarkably consistent monthly peaks in stress expressions.
Consistent peaks. When do they happen?
The peaks in stress expressions consistently occur in specific periods. In January, usually around week 2. In May, around week 1. In August, around week 3. And in December, around week 1.
January, May, August, December. Does that align with anything specific in the academic or professional calendar?
Yes, almost perfectly. These peaks align with key academic calendar milestones and major life transitions. Think about it.
Okay, January.
Start of a new semester? Maybe job applications are due? The looming realization of future plans or lack thereof?
May?
Graduation season. Intense pressure of final exams, finishing theses, and crucially, securing postgraduate plans, jobs, or grad school acceptances.
August.
When many start new jobs or begin graduate programs, often involving moving to new cities and adjusting to entirely new environments. Peak transition time.
And December.
Pressures of final exams, end-of-year work deadlines, maybe holiday stress, and the anticipation or anxiety about the year ahead, internship deadlines.
Wow, so it maps right onto the typical cycles of academia and early career life.
Exactly. This cyclical pattern aligns well with established models of transition, which include stages of anticipation before events, adjustment during the event, and the eventual achievement or fallout afterward. It powerfully demonstrates how the predictable yet unique circumstances of each academic year and career transition trigger distinct waves of stress for these emerging adults online.
We've taken a deep dive into emerging adulthood, exploring its definitions, the widening gap between aspirations and reality, and the powerful economic, social, and psychological forces at play. It's clear this is a profoundly challenging and complex period.
Absolutely.
But let's step back for a moment. What is adulthood, fundamentally? And how do these contemporary trends challenge our long-held understanding of it?
That's a huge, almost philosophical question, right?
Yeah.
But it's central to this discussion. Historically, as Sam Bakken points out, life transitions were often rigid, predetermined by tradition and necessity, and largely irreversible. Once you crossed a threshold, that was it.
Right, we talked about that irreversibility.
But today, traditional adult roles and chores like financial independence, marriage, parenthood are increasingly choice-dependent. This means individuals feel they can decide whether to adopt these roles, when to adopt them, or even in some cases to reverse them, at least for a period, like moving back home.
Which introduces a lot of ambiguity.
A profound ambiguity into what it truly means to be an adult in the 21st century.
So the very concept of adulthood is becoming inherently fuzzy, less clearly defined than it once was.
Exactly. Vaknin argues quite strongly that the modern extension of childhood, maybe up to age 12, and adolescence, which, due to ongoing brain development, is now often considered to extend up to age 25.
Yeah.
This casts the very concept of adulthood into significant doubt. He calls it very, very ambiguous and equivocal. His point is, if the transitional phases are so stretched out, the arrival point itself becomes indistinct.
If we can't agree on what adulthood is, how can we even discuss whether someone has achieved it or why they might be delaying it?
That's precisely the dilemma he highlights.
And how does Vaknin attempt to define adulthood, given this ambiguity and the shifts he observes? Does he offer a definition?
He offers two contrasting definitions to try and make sense of it. There's the biological definition.
Yeah.
Reaching a certain age, demonstrating the capability for procreation, achieving physical maturity, possessing a full-fledged brain.
Purely physical.
Purely physical and neurological. Then there's the more prevalent functional or societal definition. This involves fulfilling certain roles, acting in specific ways expected of adults, undertaking responsibilities and chores, consciously complying with social norms.
So doing adult things.
Right. He gives various cultural examples. In Judaism, a male becomes an adult at 13 by conforming socially. In Israel, serving in the army often signifies adulthood and independence. In stark contrast, he notes that in Afghanistan, there's effectively no concept of adolescence, with children transitioning directly into adult responsibilities.
And
And then he makes his most controversial claim for the U.S. context, stating that here one is effectively not required to become an adult, implying a societal primitiveness that allows for a lifelong possibility of remaining a pure eternus.
eternal child.
The eternal child, yes.
And building on this idea of the pure eternus, Vaknin has some very strong, even controversial critiques of this delayed adulthood phenomenon, suggesting it's not just a societal shift, but something more problematic in the individual psyche.
He certainly does. Vaknin introduces a highly provocative and, it must be said, often criticized perspective. He argues that despite facing legitimate economic difficulties, which he concedes, but argues previous generations also encountered and often managed to overcome.
Okay.
This current generation, particularly Gen Z in his view, is, in his words, spoiled and pampered, inherently weak, and characterized by a narcissistic shared fantasy of never growing up.
Wow. Spoiled, weak, narcissistic, shared fantasy. Those are incredibly loaded terms.
Extremely loaded. He contends that this widespread break from traditional paths is pathological, contributing to what he calls mentally sick younger generations. In his controversial view, delaying adulthood is actively perceived by them not just as a necessity, but as a luxury, something fun, a right strategy, and even a core ideology.
So he sees it as a deliberate choice, driven by flawed character rather than primarily circumstance.
That's a fair summary of his controversial position, yes. He believes they've adopted this mindset by active choice, leading to a generation resistant to conventional adult responsibilities.
You mentioned a potential narcissistic shared fantasy and a critique of weakness, but is this uniform across genders in his view? Are young men and women experiencing this delayed adulthood in the same way?
Not at all, according to Vaknin and the data he cites. The sources highlight a striking and significant gender divide in how emerging adulthood is being navigated.
A gender divide? How so?
According to a 2016 study by the U.S. Census Bureau, which Vaknin prominently cites, young women are often far more engaged in and achieving traditional markers of adulthood than young men.
So women are on a distinctly different trajectory, seemingly embracing adult roles while men are not in this view.
Precisely. Young women are consistently described in that analysis as much more mature, much better educated, and much more serious about life than their male counterparts.
What do the numbers say?
The statistics cited by Vaknin from that 2016 U.S. Census Bureau study are quite compelling. 70% of young women between 25 and 34 were employed. In stark contrast, only 49% of young men in the same age bracket.
That's a huge gap in employment.
It is. Furthermore, the study indicated that young women are actually making more money than young men under the age of 25. He also points out that for each male graduate, there are almost 2 female graduates.
The college gender gap.
Right. And as we know, education is consistently the best predictor of future income and career success. This paints a picture, in Vaknin's interpretation, of young women actively and systematically embracing adulthood and its responsibilities.
So they don't reject it.
In his view, no. They embrace the tasks, signposts, passages of life, getting an education, marrying, having children, investing in themselves much more proactively than young men.
And what about young men in this picture? How does Vaknin describe their trajectory in contrast?
Conversely, and again controversially, Vaknin portrays young men as having given up on life completely.
Completely? That's extreme.
It is. He suggests they have not only abandoned traditional life aspirations, but also have given up on young women as potential partners. He goes so far as to claim that this societal shift among young men makes it impossible for heterosexual women to find suitable partners who are equally engaged in building a future.
Wow. That's a bleak and highly controversial take on gender dynamics.
It's extremely bleak, and it reinforces his argument that this phenomenon of delayed adulthood is, in part, a deliberate choice or a profound withdrawal, particularly among young men, with significant societal consequences.
So it's clearly a complicated picture with diverse experiences and some very strong, even clashing opinions about the underlying drivers. Given all these challenges and varied trajectories, how can we as a society effectively support young adults? How do we help them navigate this incredibly complex stage and foster more positive developmental pathways?
This raises an important question that the NCBI source thoroughly addresses. How can we ensure individuals flourish amidst these new challenges, rather than floundering? The core insight they offer revolves around the critical role of the match or mismatch between an individual's unique resources and the environmental challenges and supports they encounter.
Match or mismatch between the person and their environment.
Exactly. It's all about these dynamic, influential, bidirectional interactions, what researchers term person-context coactions.
What do you mean by person-context coactions? Could you give us a more concrete example to clarify that concept?
Certainly. The NCBI source, drawing on work by Lerner and Overton, explains that developmental trajectories depend on these multiple, influential, bidirectional person-context coactions. Essentially, individuals during emerging adulthood aren't just passively shaped by their environment.
They're active players.
Yes, they actively act as co-developers of their own developmental pathways. They adaptively respond to the biological, social, cultural, physical, environmental contexts that they both influence and are influenced by.
Okay, an example might help.
Sure. Think about a young person with a strong ambition to start their own business. That's the person's internal drive. If they're in a supportive environment, the context maybe they have access to mentorship programs, family offering a place to live temporarily, a community with good networking.
Right.
The coaction, the interplay between their ambition and these supports likely leads to a positive trajectory. They have a good shot.
And if the context isn't supportive,
If that same ambitious person lacks those financial or social supports, they might struggle immensely. They can't afford living costs while starting up, can't access guidance. The mismatch between their drive and the lack of supportive context leads to a much more difficult, maybe even stalled trajectory.
so the fit between the person and their environment is absolutely crucial for success.
Exactly. If a significant life transition, say from school to work, provides a reasonable, developmentally appropriate challenge, and the emerging adult successfully navigates it with adequate support,
They grow from it.
right, their developmental trajectory is enhanced. They learn, they build resilience. In contrast, if that same transition lacks critical supports or is an inappropriate match for their abilities, like an inadequate vocational program for someone with a learning disorder, or a sudden loss of chronic disease management support,
Yeah.
and they consequently experience failure, then their developmental trajectory may be severely impaired. This can lead to significantly less achievement across their lifespan in various domains.
So support during these transitions is key.
Absolutely critical. The changes during emerging adulthood are so profound, moving from family dependency to independence, school to work, that emerging adults simply need substantial supports to navigate this stage successfully.
And even more so for those with extra challenges.
Exactly. Those with pre-existing disabilities or chronic health conditions like the CKD example require even more targeted and intensive support to flourish.
What are some of the key protective factors that can specifically help foster these positive trajectories? What does the NCBI source say can genuinely make a difference?
The NCBI source identifies several crucial protective factors. These act as vital buffers and accelerators for positive development. First, mentoring relationships play an absolutely vital role.
Having a guide someone experienced.
Exactly. Having a trusted individual who can provide guidance, advice, emotional support, help navigate complex decisions, or just be a sounding board that can make a huge difference.
Makes sense. What else?
Second, socioeconomic supports are critical. This primarily means financial assistance from families for things like education costs, transportation, help with rent for independent living, maybe staying on family health insurance.
The practical money help.
Right. The availability of this support is, realistically, largely determined by parental resources. Wealthier parents, or those with fewer children to support, generally provide more.
And what about families with fewer resources? Or divorced parents?
Well, that's a point the research highlights. Sadly, studies indicate that children of divorced parents often receive less financial assistance, which can add another layer of disadvantage during this already costly transition.
And beyond direct financial aid, what about the more intangible but equally important support from families?
That's the third key factor. Guidance and emotional support from parents and even grandparents.
What does that look like?
It encompasses providing thoughtful advice, sharing relevant information based on their own experience, offering emotional stability and encouragement. Parents might help emerging adults navigate complex healthcare systems, formulate realistic educational or vocational goals, assist with understanding apartment leases, offer wise counsel on navigating intimate relationships.
Basically being a supportive presence.
Exactly. A strong, Social and financial connection to parents who have adequate resources is highlighted as a very significant positive factor. It acts as a crucial safety net and launching pad.
Okay. Mentoring, socioeconomic support, family guidance. Finally, what about internal resources? Personal qualities within the young adult that can help.
The fourth, and perhaps most inspiring crucial factor identified by the NCBI is adolescent hope.
Hope. How do they define that?
It's not just wishful thinking. It's presented as a vital form of personal capital. This form of hope acts as a powerful protective factor, guarding against the development of social, emotional, and behavioral disorders.
How does it protect them?
It strongly correlates with and reliably predicts a wide array of positive outcomes. Things like academic achievement, delaying early sexual activity, a lower likelihood of engaging in violent behavior.
So hope has tangible benefits. What does it require?
In this context, hope requires two key components. First, a strong sense of self-efficacy, that deep-seated belief in one's own ability to succeed and overcome challenges.
Believing in yourself.
Right. And second, a clear knowledge of alternate outcomes, the ability to envision different positive possibilities for the future, even if the current path is difficult. It's about seeing pathways forward.
So goals and the belief you can reach them.
Exactly. This hope is vividly reflected in an individual's concrete goals and aspirations for their current and future selves. It's about having an internal compass and the belief that you can steer your own course, even through turbulent waters.
We've taken a deep dive into emerging adulthood, peeling back the layers that separate personal preference from undeniable circumstance. It's clear that while the desire for traditional milestones remains remarkably strong across generations,
Yeah, the Stanford data really showed that.
the actual path to achieving them has become incredibly complex, often fraught with obstacles. This seems due to a powerful confluence of economic realities, skyrocketing housing costs, the immense burden of student debt,
Huge factors.
alongside shifting social norms around relationships and work, and evolving psychological landscapes, including that alarming rise in mental health challenges. And as some controversial perspectives like Vaknin suggest, perhaps even changing personal priorities and maybe a new understanding or even rejection of what it means to be independent.
It's a tangled web for sure. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound and ongoing changes in our social and economic landscapes, coupled with what some describe as fundamental psychological and ideological shifts, well, it means we as a society genuinely need to seriously reconsider our long-held expectations around what truly defines adulthood today.
Because the old definition isn't fitting the new reality for many.
Exactly. The traditional American dream, with its clear linear markers of success, is simply out of reach for a significant and growing number of young people. And this discrepancy, as the Stanford study showed, is leading to very real, measurable negative impacts on their well-being and the collective health of our society.
The Stanford study, with its compelling data on that widening gap between ideal and reality, concludes with a really powerful and provocative thought.
Yeah.
Perhaps instead of younger generations being seen as failing to achieve an outdated American dream, maybe we as a society should consider a fundamental redesign of that dream itself.
Redesign the dream.
What does successful, meaningful adulthood truly look like in today's dynamic, complex world? And how can we best support individuals in carving out fulfilling, purposeful lives, whether or not they follow the traditional script set by generations past?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. What stands out to you as the most critical, actionable takeaway from this deep dive into emerging adulthood?